So this is the second video lecture on the chapter of old age. And we left off when we were talking about why people age. So some of the different theories here. And there were the two basic groups of theories, and that would be a really great discussion question, is which theories make the most sense to you? And the genetic programming theories say that basically we age because we're designed to age. And the variable rate theories say, well, there's something, maybe it's an environmental input, but something is different about a person who ages quickly versus, early versus a person who doesn't age quickly. The next couple slides then, and I'm afraid I'm going to be clicking around back and forth, but are more, what do I want to say, they're more sort of social demographic language. So the question when we were talking about one of the other terms was longevity, right? Longevity, how long people live, and then something called lifespan, and lifespan refers to how long is it possible for someone of your species to live. Well, there's a phenomena here called a survival curve. And what a survival curve is something that demographers, social demographers, and epidemiologists, and probably people at the CDC, World Health Organizations, they use these curves, and you can see trends. And so I just wanted to show you what one of them looked like in case you're a sort of a graph kind of nerd like I am. But what this illustrates here is that over a period of time, along the bottom you have the timeline, along this side you have the probability of survival. And so over 20, so in this case you have over 20, let's say, months. This is 22 months. The odds of still being alive 22 months later is about 8%, is about 80%. The odds of being alive at 65 months later is down to only 50%. So in the beginning, right, you're alive now, but what are the odds that you're going to be alive moving forward? Then you can sort of see. And so a lot of these charts get used for cancer research, and they're talking about survivability and those sort of statistics. This next image here, this is a life expectancy curve. And what it illustrates is your risk of dying at any particular age in life. So I think that's what that says, actual percentage of actual deaths. So down here, you have a lower risk of dying at the age of 65. By the time you get to 85, that's when your peak begins to increase, right? But it's also interesting, make sure I got that right, at the average age, about 50% of the people have died. And because there are fewer of you as you age, then your risk of dying actually begins to be on the decline. Annual percentage of deaths by the population. Yeah, so there's a greater percentage of the population who are dying at 85. And then as there are fewer and fewer people that are alive at 95, obviously you have fewer and fewer deaths. So there's all different kinds of ways that social demographers can talk about survivability curves, and I'm trying to think of the demographic pyramid, where it shows how you have a lot of people at the bottom of the pyramid, and you go up to the top and you have fewer people. And then there's also in your textbook, it makes reference to something called the Hill-Flick limit, and I've already talked about that. I didn't call it the Hill-Flick limit. That is the number of times, the maximum limit that a cells can divide, and I'm pretty sure it says it's 50. 50 is what the Hill-Flick limit is, which I think lends support for the genetic programming model. Okay, this slide really has a bunch of words on it, but it all is just about the various changes, the physical, because you remember your textbook is divided into cognitive, physical, social, and emotional changes as you go through the life course. And so I've tried to just summarize it in as few slides as possible. But what's beginning to happen as you get towards the end of your life is you've got a lot of changes, and they're all kind of wearing out, right? And your book talks about how some of these systems are quite fast, and once they begun to decline, they move really quickly, and others are a little bit slower in their processing. There's a term here that we're going to see a couple times. It's called reserve capacity. And the reserve capacity, they use the metaphor, it's like a battery. It's how long your body can go before it needs to be recharged. So I was talking to, I'll give you an example, an illustration of this. I was talking to a friend of mine about driving out here. So I drive an hour both ways to go to work. And she said, what we have realized is that this is harder to do as you get older, because when you were younger, it was easy to drive a lot. And then like you could, the point is that it's harder. It's harder for older people to recoup or to rebound, right? Once they get tired more quickly, and it takes longer for them to rest. That's what I'm trying to say. And that's what the reserve capacity is that your backup resources. You just wear out more quickly and you don't rebound quite as fast. Some things that are happening in the brain, for instance, I think I mentioned this before, maybe not, is that there's a reduction in the number of dopamine receptors. And this is thought to be one explanation for what Parkinson's disease is. You remember dopamine receptors are about reward and pleasure. And the myelin, we don't really talk so much about it in this class, but in the gen psych class, we talk about the myelin is that fatty tissue that covers the neurons. And it is, the function of the myelin is to speed up the signal. So when the myelin thins or deteriorates, that disease is actually what multiple sclerosis is. So this may be one of the reasons for the delay, the cognitive delay we begin to see in older people. So you've lost some balance, reaction time, blah, blah, blah. Move over to vision. You've got some cardiacs or something called age-related molecular macular degeneration. And my understanding, and you may understand this better than me, but it has to do with the inability to sort of see fine lines, to finally to look at or to recognize, I don't want to say boundaries, but find the lineal distinctions. And then glaucoma, and if you ever have your eyes checked, this is where they do that puff thing right in your eye, but that tests for internal pressure, and that can actually cause blindness. So these other two, cataracts and degeneration, there is some treatment for, but glaucoma, there is no treatment for. Too much pressure begins to damage the optical nerve, and can't fix that just yet. Hearing loss seems to be more common amongst men than it is amongst women. My mom's partner has a lot of hearing loss, and it can be very frustrating for partners. Can begin to interfere with your relationships. It's like you're not listening, you don't hear me. And while hearing aids are a great option, not only do they, and they're expensive, and apparently Medicare doesn't pay for them, but they also, just when they can hear you, they also can hear all the background noise. So my mom's partner will take them out when he's in loud places, which means he obviously can't hear what we're saying either, if he doesn't want to hear the background noise in the room. Some more changes on here. So your textbook suggests that about 50% of people over the age of 65 still consider themselves to be sexually active. It does not say intercourse, it simply says sexually active, but sexuality is certainly a use it or lose it kind of thing. The issue for men is that it takes longer, so refractory period takes longer. It may take longer to achieve erection in the first place. It may require a little bit more effort. Women's issue has to do with lubrication, the thinning of the tissues in the vaginal wall that can create a lot of pain for her. So this is, anyway, but the statistics say that a good proportion of older people are still sexually active, but again, it doesn't use the term intercourse to describe it. Okay, sleep changes begin to happen, and your book tells us that sleep changes are good, but a disruptive sleep cycle, in other words, not sleeping at all or sleeping all the time, that is not good. So disruption is not good, but changes are to be expected. Earlier, getting up in the morning earlier, going to bed earlier, that's pretty, I like to think of that as more sort of tied to the natural daylight cycle. We also begin to see chronic conditions. I bolded this term right here because chronic are the conditions that really never go away. You develop them, and if you continue to live, you live with them. The top 6 of the 7 causes of death are all considered chronic. So heart disease, diabetes, cancer, stroke, and I stuck this in here. I stuck the FAST. I should bold that actually. For all of you nursing students out there that are going to need to know this stuff. But that's the way you can remember the symptoms of a stroke: face drooping, arm weakness, speech difficulty, and time. And my understanding, my mother's partner also had a stroke. My understanding is don't go to sleep. get yourself to the hospital as quickly as possible, because early intervention, you can recover quite quickly or quite well from strokes. And those strokes are basically blood clots in the brain that can happen pretty much to anybody. It looks like there's a mistake there, lower respiratory and influenza. Hypertension, diabetes, and there also is a racial component, or an ethnic and a racial component to these conditions too. They are more common in brown and black people than they are in white people. And that explanations for that is probably better suited for another class. But there are lots of intriguing explanations, including environmental stress, prejudice, racism, lack of access to healthcare, a biased healthcare system that it treats more vigorously white folks than people of color, that the research is heavy on white folks versus people of color. I think I'm going to stop here now, and when I come back on the next slide or the next lecture, we will talk about some of the mental and the physical changes that happen later in life.